I think the most powerful variation of the teleological argument is what we call the moral or lawgiver argument. And the moral or lawgiver argument, it really begins with this question that asks, do objective moral laws exist? Or are objective moral laws simply imaginary and they're just social constructs? Or in other words, are there moral laws, laws that says things are right and wrong that should govern the entire human race? Are there moral laws that are universal? And culture, at least in the West, is trying to say no, objective moral laws do not exist. They're social constructs. They're determined by oppressive religions or oppressive governments, and they're social constructs. They're not real. They're not binding on all people. So take, for example, something like sexuality. Let's say that Christianity says that you can only have sexual relations with your married partner, and someone in the West will say, well, that's not an objective moral law. It's just a moral law you set for yourself. It's not binding on all people. So what's right for you could be right for you, but it might not be right for me. I don't care. I don't believe that, and so I deny the existence of objective moral laws. That argument can get dangerous really quickly, because when you take something, let's say, like racism, how can you say that what's right for you is right for you and what's right for me is right for me? Do you have the moral courage to say, when you look at something as wicked as racism or, let's say, rape, can you say, I don't care what your culture tells you, I don't care what your law tells you, I don't care what the people around you say, I don't care what you believe. You could believe that rape is moral. It doesn't matter. Rape is wrong. Can you say, do you have the moral courage to say, I don't care what you think, I don't care what your culture says, rape is wrong? Because if you do, then you believe that for you to say that rape is wrong, that is an objective, universal moral law. And so if you believe that objective moral laws exist, guess what? The existence of moral laws, of transcendent, universal moral laws, seems to point to the existence of a moral lawgiver. And that's what we call God. The moral laws can only be binding on all people. In other words, moral laws can be transcendent above what people think only if the source of that moral law is also transcendent above what people think. Does that make sense? So the presence of moral laws, objective moral laws, seems to suggest that the moral lawgiver also exists. C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity put it this way: conscience reveals to us a moral law whose source cannot be found in the natural world, thus pointing to a supernatural lawgiver. And I think I mentioned racism before, and the reason is because one of the most powerful uses of the moral argument was made by Martin Luther King Jr. in this letter from Birmingham jail, and quite frankly, if you read MLK, he uses the moral argument everywhere. He appeals to the moral law to say, it doesn't matter what your culture thinks, racism is evil, and the reason is because God said it is evil. If you don't have God, you really don't have binding moral laws. You can say, oh, I wish it would be this way, I think society would be nice if it's this way, but you can't say that it's binding on all humanity unless moral laws come from God. Another variation of the moral argument is actually what we call the problem of evil argument. Have you ever talked to a non-Christian and they say something like this: God cannot exist because so much evil exists? They say, oh, I can't believe in a God who would allow all this evil, all this war, violence, racism to exist. I can't believe in a God who would let so much evil just exist in this world. So let's say someone says that. I would say that, yes, this problem of evil is certainly a problem for a Christian. It is a difficult question to answer. We have good answers, I want to say, but it is a legitimate question. It's a conundrum. But I want to say that, yes, it's a problem certainly for the Christian, but the problem of evil is an even bigger problem for the atheist. Because, let me put it this way, if God does not exist, guess what? There's no such thing as good or evil. Let's say that someone is outraged by murder. Someone is killed. A white man kills a black man in the streets. Okay, so let's take this example. And an atheist is outraged by that. I can't believe in a God who would allow this type of evil to exist. Well, let me take a step back and say, well, guess what? If God doesn't exist, why is that thing evil? You're outraged by an event, but you have no logical basis for that outrage. I took out a can of Raid and I killed some ants yesterday. Was that murder? Was that heinous? Was that outrageous? Was that evil? No, it wasn't. Why should the murder of a black man be any different? He's just a Homo sapien. He's just another living organism. Are you just biased because he's a part of your own species? What's the objective moral ground? The best that the atheist can come up with is, oh, I don't know. I just feel that it is this way. I just feel. Don't you know? Can't you just feel that this is evil? Look at how weak that argument sounds. You can only appeal to just how someone feels. It's not a strong, rational, cogent argument. And so the problem evil argument is basically saying, ultimately, you seem to believe that evil exists. And guess what? That intuition you have about evil existing, that's also an intuition for the existence of a moral lawgiver who set a transcendent moral law. So it doesn't matter what culture thinks. It doesn't matter what the law says. Some things are evil because a God is out there who has ordered the universe. And that's why the problem evil is actually a variation of the teleological argument and a pretty strong reason, an argument that a rebuttal that we can use when non-Christians pose this question to us.